Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this WIOA Wednesday webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar and the technical assistance as well. As a reminder, a couple of housekeeping things before we get started today. All participants on this call are in listen-only mode and cannot unmute themselves. If you have questions as the webinar proceeds, please post those in the chat box and we will answer them throughout the session as well as at the end for Q&A. A reminder that this webinar is being recorded and the presentation and recording from today will be up on our website and the Illinois WorkNet website within 48 hours. And I will post that link where you can access the slides if you would like to download those and follow along. I'll post those in the chat momentarily. In an effort to be as accessible as possible, this webinar will be offering live closed captioning. It isn't as accurate as we would love it to be, but it does do a pretty good job. But if you feel that you need more accurate closed captioning capabilities, you can always watch the recording, and those will be completely accurate as we are able to edit those. And then if you have a faulty internet connection or audio connection today, please feel free to call in using your original phone number and the original registration email that was sent to you. And with that, I'm going to start us off with our two beginning polls that we do every WIOA Wednesday webinar. And so first, we would like to know where your local area is. And so if you could answer Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central, Southern, or statewide. We actually were just talking about on this call where we are all from prior to you all logging on with us this afternoon. So definitely relative. Okay. So it looks like the majority of us are joining from northern part of the state this morning or this afternoon. I keep thinking it's morning, not this day. So Northern Illinois and Chicago, and then the rest of us sprinkled across the state. I'm joining you from Central Illinois. So hello to all my fellow Central Illinoisans. Welcome. Thank you guys for taking the time out of your afternoon to spend with us. And then our second question we would like to know is just which partner do you best represent? So whether you're joining us from Title 1, 2, 3, or 4, or if you best represent another WIOA partner or stakeholder or our state local workforce innovation board. So we'll give everyone a couple of seconds to answer this. Okay, so it looks like most of you are joining us from Title 1, and then the second is the other WIOA partners and stakeholders, and the rest of us sprinkled across the board. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for always doing those quick little analytics that we like to incorporate every webinar. And then I will hand it off to our presenters for today and our team. This is session 3 of a 3-part series, and we're excited to hear what they have for us today. Take it away.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Tennille Smith, and I'm the Vice President of Career Access and Workforce Development for Skills for Chicagoland's Future. I am going to be monitoring the chat, so feel free to be putting in all of your questions and any answers to the questions we give you as well. And I will turn it over to Susan.
Thanks, Tennille. My name is Susan Dunseth. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here at Skills. Been with the organization a little over a year, but been in the workforce space for about 22. Excited to share with you in this final segment of our series some insights and look for your feedback as well. I think this can be a really interactive session and hopefully provide good information for everyone who's joining us today. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Mike.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mike Thompson. I'm the Manager of Business and Workforce Solutions at Skills for Chicagoland's Future. Ever since finishing grad school, I've been in the workforce space, and I mostly focused on grant compliance and labor market research for our business development.
All right, so with that, I think, Kirsten, we're ready to go. So this could be repetition for those of you that have attended the other sessions before, but we think important to just share a little bit of insight on who Skills for Chicagoland's future is. So if you start on a lot of information on this page, if you start on the left side and you really look at where skills sits, skills is really, we position ourselves as really a demand driven workforce agency. And what that means is it starts with that very first puzzle piece of the employer's talent needs and the open jobs that they have. So we really start building our relationships with our clients and our employers. And then we have many partners that we work with who work specifically with the and underemployed to be that business intermediary or that bridge to be able to provide the insights, the information, and what we learn as possible opportunities for partnership from those employers and those clients that we have sometimes daily, but definitely weekly and bi-weekly contact with across, for us, the Chicagoland area. I think that the key with that is that we hope today and this session, as well as the other two, to be able to share some insights across the board that having those relationships really help us develop in a whole other way because we really start with a partnership with those employers. If you move over to the right side, you get to see just some overall placement insights from 2020 on the 981 individuals who were placed through skills in 2020, but over 8,100 folks have been placed through skills since our creation in 2012. We're breaking this out in a couple different ways by race and ethnicity, by educational level, by age, as well as for those that are in the Chicagoland area, by neighborhood. We think that that's important right now and even elevated to a higher level with all that's transpired in the last year with COVID, with the racial injustice focus, and making sure that those that have experienced the largest disparity in our communities around Chicago, not just with unemployment, but education, health services, and so on, are the folks that we're really trying to impact the most by the services. And so the heat map there, really the darker the neighborhood, those are the more folks that we have been able to serve in those communities. So that gives you just a little bit of an overview on who Skills is and what we do. And if you want to go to the next slide, we'll jump into really what this whole 3 weeks has been about. So we first started, our first session was about the people and transferring skills to new employment opportunities, since we know that that has been the one of the words of the year is probably pivot, right? On people making that change. Then last session, we really talked about how you make that pivot and particularly how you upskill in a virtual world because it's extremely challenging, as we know. And today we're finishing up with partnerships. So it's people, process, and now partnerships. And the best ways to navigate employer relationships, not just before the pandemic, but even now, because of the pandemic, things have definitely shifted. So that will be the focus for today's call. And if you go to the next slide, we're going to dig into more the agenda and the objectives or the topics we're going to discuss on this. So how we navigate employer relationships. The first is going to be about an industry outlook. And early in 2020, we really started, it hadn't been a way we differentiate our employers, but early on in the pandemic, we had to make a shift and think about how we work with our employer partners because things had definitely changed. So we want to talk to you about that and see if you've seen the same kind of things in your areas, or maybe how you've sort of segmented out your employer partners. The second is value. This little exercise we're going to do on the pains and gains that employers feel and how you may be able to address those. Then we want to get into a few minutes in talking about commercial awareness and the importance of that, especially today, in light of all that is going on in our landscape of our state, some of our cities, and then the country at a larger scale. And then just finally ending with a few comments on the commitment understanding that's really needed to be able to navigate those employer partnerships and those relationships in 2021. So that's the agenda for today. That's what we hope to focus on, but we'll be sure to answer questions as we go along as well. So the first thing we wanted to touch on is this categorization that we did early in 2020 on our employers. And I think you've probably heard this on previous calls, but I can remember the week ended March 13th of 2020. we were looking at all of the employers. We were getting calls throughout the day, every day that week, saying, hey, I know you were working to submit candidates for this opportunity. We've put a halt on hiring. And so what we decided we really had to do is look at our clients and look at our employers in 3 buckets. In that top category, who is operational, meaning they're open for business and they're hiring, so they're still growing and needing candidates. Second, who's operational but not necessarily hiring, because maybe business has slowed, so they're trying to retain the folks that they have. And then 3, who's not operational and not hiring. We think this is a really key piece to understand and will lead through the discussion today. But understanding truly the pain points that that HR teams are facing through this pandemic, I think has been pretty substantial. So I want to take a minute and go through that column on characteristics of what we learned, and then I'm happy to see some things in the chat that you might have as well, on some things that you've seen with your in your markets, with either the employers, the clients you work with, maybe the industries that you've seen, the changes that have happened in the pandemic. So let's talk first about characteristics. So what we saw from our employer partners is a reporting of high absenteeism and issues really having to do with either transportation, which has always been there, but it became even more prevalent during the pandemic, and especially childcare. When schools were doing virtual learning, that high absenteeism was really something that was affecting the HR folks that we deal with. And whether you were in the recruitment side and hiring candidates, everybody in HR was having to make a pivot to deal with the fact that they're still trying to operate their business, but they're also trying to deal with this high absenteeism, whether it be folks that had COVID, folks that had to be quarantined, or folks that were just afraid about coming to work. That was a reality of what the HR teams were feeling. Second of all, hiring. What we learned is they're really at a point that they were hiring the most responsive who meet the minimum requirements. So basically those that were hiring, and if we look over to industries, essential retail was where we really saw this. They could not hire folks fast enough based on the demand and based on their business model of all that was changing. All the folks that were going out to stock up and buy things, they were really just saying our applicant tracking systems are flooded with candidates. And what we're really trying to say is, if we call you today for an interview, you applied yesterday, we call you, you don't answer the phone, we're moving on to the next person. So that really was a reality. As long as you met the minimum qualifications, you were going to get hired, versus, let's say, years before, or times maybe even a month before, during times of low unemployment, they would search through all candidates and then figure out who was the best fit. They really didn't have the time for that anymore. The next item was this uptick in demand for contingent labor. We saw this in some of our more professional and business services. They just became very leery of hiring full-time staff, but were more willing to bring on folks that were contingent or temp to perm, to really see how this played out and how their financials and their earnings were affected by what was going on with COVID. So that, from a people standpoint, sort of changed what we were seeing. From a process standpoint, everybody knows this one, it became extremely dynamic and volatile. And as far as candidate feedback, getting response from your application, or us even getting response from our employers, became completely inconsistent. They just did not have the bandwidth, and we have to think about it. Their applications in many cases went up tenfold, but that doesn't mean they hired tenfold more folks in their HR departments. So now those people are trying to deal with all of the COVID issues, but also this huge influx of candidates. So feedback became pretty inconsistent, and you really many times didn't know if you were moving forward, if you weren't, if you had been eliminated, you just simply did not know. We also know that as part of the onboarding, all those new CDC guidelines and making people safe became paramount. And so for a lot of our candidates, that became a question we wanted to ask with our employers, because we got that question with our candidates to say, is it safe to go to work? We literally tracked by employer what they told us, things that they were implementing, from materials, to locations, to social distancing, to hand sanitizer, to how they've altered schedules. All of that became pretty important. So that I think that parlayed into, we know there were certain barriers that people received in some jobs, or experience, excuse me, in some jobs. That was being relieved as well. Sometimes background checks, sometimes drug screens, sometimes things that they just needed to get workers going were being removed because they needed to get people going in a safe and efficient manner. I'll go quickly through the next couple, but essential employees and delivery of business offerings really became paramount. So they knew that they had to deliver, but maybe at a much higher capacity than they've had to before. And so because of that, that really became a focus of HR, is they've got to figure out staffing levels and what they need in sometimes unprecedented times. Think about UPS, think about Amazon, that they were always busy, but where people were now ordering at home, this became pretty much a whole different world for them, and managing the people needed to be able to keep the business offerings going. And then the last thing I would say is, we saw out of the summer that there was an extreme shift in focus, at least in the Chicagoland area, on implementing diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies, and removing those blockers that might be preventing candidates from making it through their process, when really many times they were put in there, sometimes unconsciously, sometimes because they just thought they wanted to eliminate applicant tracking systems, eliminate people through their applicant tracking system. We also saw a change in that some of those barriers were getting removed, as now there was a matchup having to happen between applicants and the strategies that were being worked on inside the organization. And then from a technology standpoint, not a surprise, lots of ATS backlog. That theory that sometimes you apply to a job and it goes into a black hole, that definitely was happening, as well as developing or incorporating virtual platforms. For a lot of our employers, that idea of going to a job fair or having people come to their site to interview was not a reality. They were having to pivot and shift to, how do I do this all virtually when I've always done face-to-face interviews? That was a real thing that folks were working through. Is there anything else, and I'd love to see in the chat, that you saw as 2020 evolved from your employers who were both operational and hiring, that you think was a key learning that you saw? I'd love to see those things in the chat as we move forward here. Don't think this list is all inclusive, but this is basically what the skills team was seeing from our employer partners. And it really made us stop and think about, there's a lot of discussion in the media about the heroes, and not to take anything away from the heroes that I know were from the healthcare to essential retail, but I would also say the human resources staffs inside these organizations in this category 1, many of them were heroes as well, trying to pivot within a couple of weeks the whole way they do their business, to be able to still get people safely to work. All right, I'm going to move on to category 2. Feel free to put anything else you think may be relevant in the chat, but those category 2s were really businesses who were operational but not hiring. What we heard from a lot of folks, and you'll see again in the third column, the employers or the industries that we were hearing that from, they were really trying to keep those that were currently employed, even if they were not hiring. So we got calls from a lot of our employers saying, listen, we may be furloughing or laying off some, we may be doing none, but we are stopping all hiring effective immediately and really indefinitely until we know what's going to happen. So we're going to try to keep employed the employees we have right now, but the initiatives we had to uptick or to increase our hiring, we're putting all of our positions and requisitions on hold. That for us became an opportunity to say, we totally understand, that makes sense for us, but it obviously changed the number of employers who were hiring and how we could actually service those employers. The last category 3 was those were really working on our plan to work to return safely, because layoffs and furloughs were happening because 2 things. They were not open and they were not hiring, obviously, if they were not open. And so that just really became something that we've been monitoring, and Mike's going to talk about that a little bit more when we get into it, about this whole phased Restore Illinois plan became paramount for us to really understand what industries and employers were in each of those areas and how that might affect their ability to come back. There are 1,000,001 different analysts out there that have tried to, put into a magic ball of what things are gonna look like even in 2021 on when industries will come back. But at the end of the day, that Restore Illinois plan is really where we know things can happen or not happen for certain industries, and helps us be a little bit more sensitive to our employer partners instead of just reaching out saying, are you hiring? Are you hiring? We know that that is a component that's going to be important in understanding that. Any questions or comments on that piece, or anything anybody wants to add to the chat on things you saw that we may have missed? So the last comment that I'll move on is, again, that column on the end really shows where we were seeing from an industry standpoint, sort of buckets in that category 1, operational and hiring, category 2, operational but not necessarily hiring, and then category 3, where there was really not operational or not hiring at all, that we saw across the board. So if you go on to the next slide, we've talked a lot in the last 2 meetings, and we use this tool Burning Glass, but the reason I want to bring this up is if you think about what we just talked about that the HR teams were facing, and you look at this slide that talks about pandemic resilient industries. So across jobs for the last 12 months across Illinois, with a requirement of only 0 to 2 years experience, this tells you the jobs that were actually in that first bucket of who were operational and hiring. What that tells us is the sensitivity that really needs to be thought about when partnering with those employers, because of the fact that we know they are experiencing all, if not many, of those issues that we mentioned on the previous slide. Whenever you're dealing with someone who works in the human resources or recruiting piece related to these industries, they're trying to stay operational. They're also trying to hire, and now they have a whole list of other things. Having that in the back of your mind, I think, will help you as we go through the rest of today to understand this is the reality. Many of you may have friends and family who were working during this in those industries, and know that that was a definite challenge to be dealing with all of that. And if you go to the next slide, again, it's these top jobs. Again, last 12 months, 0 to 2 years experience across Illinois. This is a Burning Glass analysis. And you're going to see a couple different of the same things like CDL truck driver. We talked about that 2 calls ago, the demand for that. But if you think about the biggest need across the board, customer service representatives, that covers millions of different industries, employers, types of jobs. Just know that we know that sometimes for a lot of those positions, as we talked 2 calls ago, those barriers are pretty low to be able to get that job, which means the number of applicants was super high. And so when you're applying for those jobs, you're going to have to make yourself stand out, because as we mentioned, minimum qualifications and highly responsive is what's going to get the job when we've been in the pandemic. I'm going to stop there for a second and see if there's any thoughts or comments on this before we move into the next section. That's really I think our headliner for today on just really understanding what the recruitment functions and at employer partners, what they've been experiencing for the last, now going on almost a year. Okay, if there's no questions or comments, I'm going to keep it moving. So the next topic that we thought now relevant to bring in, if you think about where we're at and what we just talked about, this is the reality of what's happening with the employer partners out there. So I would like to put in the chat feedback from all of you on your definition or what you think value proposition is. I'm not going to talk for a second, and I'm going to let that chat keep going. Tennille, thanks for putting in the comments. Please type comments in chat. But can anybody give me what you think value proposition is, that definition?
It's like Christine says, what this means to you. Do you want to flesh that out a little bit more in the chat?
I think that would be great.
Yeah, I see where she's going with it.
Yeah.
I don't know if she wants to expound a little bit more.
Others can comment as well. Keep it going. Quiet group today. The value it is for the employer. Yes. How a company achieves its goals in the most efficient way. Nathan and Christine, I think you're both right. You've hit the nail on the head. So Kirsten, if we want to go ahead and pop up sort of the definition we pulled, and we sourced that, but the definition ultimately that we've got is the value proposition ensures that a product or service that you may really have is positioned around what the customer values and needs. And so as we go through the rest of today, this is really going to be the cornerstone now that we've set up sort of what's the landscape today. But this becomes the cornerstone on the discussion, because I think this is a pivot that I know myself personally in the last 20 years of work, and especially working now at Skills, I think it may seem like a small shift, and yet I think it's a really big opportunity for a lot of us to think about from the employer side. So let's get in and talk a little bit about value proposition. On the next slide, I think at first this graph may be a little bit overwhelming and you're like, holy cow, this is a lot of information. But I want to take you through it because I think it's really, really powerful. So let's start on the left-hand side with your organization. And if you go to box A, all of you, depending on the organization that you work with, have things that you do. You have your products and you have your services on what you offer. But the idea is many of us think I need to go out and sell that product or service and basically pitch it to an employer so that they see the value that I see. What value proposition does is it actually says, let's jump over to the right-hand side to the employer. The employer in their box A has things they do, and they have jobs that they have that help them achieve the things that they do. But they also have two other very important things that are important for us to know. It is, what are the gains, meaning what are the outcomes, that box B, that they are trying to achieve. That could be new initiatives, that could be growth of a certain job, that could be a DEI strategy, could be a million different things that come to just that hiring component. But they also have pains. They have obstacles that they're trying to avoid or overcome. If you find out what those are, it becomes a much different scenario, so that when you may be talking to an employer, you can then become, if we flip back over to your organization in box B and C, you can become a gain creator or a pain reliever for that employer using the products and services that you offer. So the idea is the services that you provide could help an employer achieve a specific outcome. And likewise, the services that you provide might help them avoid an obstacle or a pain that they might have. So the idea is that versus just a pitch of what you do, you're tying it to the needs of what the organization is trying to meet, their objectives, to show that you bring value to them versus having to just sell the value that you know you have. I think there's a couple comments in the box. So, how company achieves goals in the most efficient way? A proposal that places high emphasis on core values. I agree. So the idea here is that if you really understand the employer that you may be talking to or speaking with, and we're going to get into a couple scenarios because we don't all get to talk to employers. Sometimes our customers are applying to jobs that we don't have a relationship with that employer, but still understanding that employer gains that they're really looking to achieve, as well as the employer pains that they have, can help that candidate really stand out when they may be applying for a particular position at an organization. Comments or questions on this? I know it's a lot of information, but I'm hoping going through this, and then we're going to get into some real life scenarios here on how you apply this model can be helpful. All right, Kirsten, let's hit it. Let's go on to the next slide. So the next slide is, and this I really need your feedback in the chat, is this is just another version of that same slide before. But the question I have for all of you is, based on what employers are facing right now and the current landscape of human resources today, what might be some of the pains they're facing or the gains that they want to achieve? Excellent, Angela. What might be some pains or gains that you think employers are facing today? We went through some of those in that first slide about COVID and the impact, but I'd love to know just some of the things that you think are, the pain points employers are facing, as well as what are some things that they're really trying to achieve operationally as it relates to the work that we do.
And I would just say, like, you can really just think about things that you've experienced yourself or with your clients and customers during this time. So no need to really overthink it. Just think about what are some of those just even everyday barriers that you've seen since the pandemic started.
Angela, maybe, let's see, provide quality customer service. Okay, so is the idea that sometimes the employer is not finding, or they're trying to ensure and get that gain in there, that perhaps the level of customer service is different? And then pain points, not enough employees with the right credential. So sort of that supply demand piece of, I have this demand of a certain role with a certain credential, but I don't have enough supply. I think that's very relevant. We've talked about that on a couple. People are scared to work because of COVID. I mean, that is a real thing. So in some cases, it's just not enough applicants for the jobs, because if people are going to be on the front lines, they're definitely, I know that has happened, to be able to just sometimes get the pipeline. The pains of wanting to hire youth, but not having the income to bring and hire on new employees. We've set up internships to support our employers and hire. So that is a great example, Rose, on you're listening to the pain and trying to figure out how you can make a gain by offering internship support to hire youth. So you've really taken this full life cycle of, let me think about the products and services that I have, think about the gain that the employer is trying to have in hiring youth, and how you can be a gain creator by offering that internship. You've just taken this whole model full cycle on that. Excellent. Communication, struggle with getting email answered and called returned answers. Absolutely. I think that is a real thing. We're flooded with, I know myself, between our internal, we use Teams platform, with email, with calls all day, and now you can't go to someone's office to get an answer anymore, or ask a quick question. You have to actually call or set up a time to do that. That's a real pain or gain that people experience. Again, remote workers that normally wouldn't be able to take an office job. So that's an interesting one, because I think that what you're saying is a gain that can be had by the employer is that they are looking to now say, we can expand our portfolio of where people can work. It doesn't have to be just in a local market anymore. So our talent pool can offer that. And so I think being able to respond to that, depending on your focus and your agency, can be extremely valuable. Communication last year. Okay, I got that one. Email on last summer, the extra money for unemployed was keeping lower wage on the couch instead of. So that was our pain, right? That we were having, that a lot of our candidates, and so that really resulted in, I think what we talked about a second ago, is that the idea is that then it just wasn't as many candidates applying for jobs. I can tell you, we personally saw an extreme dip in we track the weekly and monthly volume of our applicants that apply to the jobs that we're working to fill. And we saw a sharp decline, and until August, when some of those benefits were no longer available, our applicant pool definitely achieved or increased, but that definitely was an impact for those employers as well. Okay, I think this is good discussion. So now we're going to take this into some real life examples. And I'd like to go back to where Rose has done like how I looked at a pain of an employer and how I turned that into a gain based on the services that I offer. So being able to say, hey, this employer, one of the things that they're trying to do is employ more youth. I know that my products or services or the things that I offer can offer internship opportunities. Then I can see that I'm helping the employer achieve their goal while also being a gain creator for them. So if we go to the next slide, we know that not everybody is able to talk to an employer. So when you kind of speak to an employer, you can ask direct questions for them. So my question for you is, and I know someone a second ago mentioned that they are actually talking to an employer before earlier today about pains and gains. I'm wondering if you literally said what's your pains and what's your gains, or do we ask other kinds of questions that could be leading to find out what those pains and gains are? So what I'd like in the chat is what types of things might you ask to learn about an employer's pains or gains if you get the opportunity to talk to them. And whoever it was that mentioned they talked to that employer this morning, would love to know the kinds of questions you were asking to really learn about those pains and gains. Pains, what do you think you are missing?
That's a good one.
Yep. What is holding you back from achieving your hiring goals? What can we do to help you? Thanks, Angela.
And Angela was the one this morning, earlier that had this conversation. Yep.
Got it. Okay, thanks, Tanel, for bridging that. I think the idea is every organization has been affected by COVID in some way. So I think those learning lessons from 2020 have given us the opportunity when we can talk to employers to say, so literally as simple as, 2020 was, it's one for the record books, right? What are the things that you've learned out of 2020 that have changed your focuses in 2021? Some folks may bring up their DEI strategy. Some folks may say we are focusing on helping veterans. We've been impacted in our community by some initiatives that are going on regarding second chance. Think about what the folks that you serve and the affinity groups that you may be serving and where you may be trying to find people jobs. There are a lot of employers out there that are looking to achieve that. And internally, their HR departments are trying to figure out, how do I achieve that goal? I need to figure out who I partner with to actually achieve that goal. Those kinds of questions can really help you in learning about where there might be a good fit. Likewise, though, if we talk about when you can't speak to an employer, because many times we don't get the opportunity and people are just applying to jobs, you've got to educate yourself on what those pains and gains are. So how might you do that? How might you learn, let's say in your area that Walmart is hiring, what could you do to educate yourself on what the pains or the gains might be? Or from our previous slides, what do you think the pains and gains might be of the staff that's doing the hiring at your local Walmart location? Deborah, can you elaborate on that training or retraining? How do you think you'd educate yourself to learn about Walmart's pains and gains and what their HR team is experiencing?
Again, think about different ways you would figure out information about companies, either in the news or just through word of mouth.
And if you don't know, then I think that is a good segue, Mike, into the next section that we were going to talk about. We sort of wanted to see the temperature about how people are researching personal experience. Yes, that definitely helps. I'm going to actually hand the reins over at this point, though, to my colleague, Mike, because I think building a new skill set to become more marketable to an employer. So excellent idea there, Deborah. I think that the idea is, if you know you're trying to figure out how you can market and how you can make your customers higher on the list for employers, but you don't always get that opportunity to talk to the employer, there are always ways to learn about what is going on with those employers, even if you never get the chance to talk to them. And so that's what we wanted to jump into next. And I'm going to hand the reins over to my esteemed colleague, Mike, to go through how we think can be some of the best ways to do that. Go ahead, Mike.
Good to go. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so if we move on to the next slide. And then actually, this is the pains and gains activity. We've already done some identification. Do you still want to do this or go straight into commercial awareness?
You're good. Sorry, I forgot about that. Go ahead, Mike.
No, good to go. So yeah, before we move on to commercial awareness, we do have a quick activity for us to really round out this pains and gains sort of application of knowledge. So I'm gonna give you all a chance to read this fact pattern here. I'll read it out loud as well. Trunking Company A is developing new business in the Midwest, and they need to hire entry-level warehouse staff. However, they would need support, screening, and training because their incumbent staff is already over capacity with other projects. Trunking Company A has 20 open opportunities, full-time, with a starting wage of $20 per hour and some benefits. The location of the warehouse is approximately a 30-minute commute by car and 1-hour commute by public transportation for the customers you serve. The company is interested in continued support efforts through the first 90 days of employment. The company has also recently announced a corporate initiative on creating a more inclusive environment and hired a chief diversity and inclusion officer to lead this. So based on this fact pattern and the resources, thinking about that other illustration earlier, the products and services that you provide as a WIOA delegate agency, what are the pains that you see this employer has? What are some of the gains that you see this employer has? And then what is your value proposition? What are tools and resources that you know as a WIOA agency you have at your disposal to directly respond to some of these needs or gains? So I'll give you all a second to read this over. And then please add your responses to the chat. If you have a pain, you can label it pain. If you have a gain, label it gain. And then if you have a value proposition or a solution, you can label it as such and then go on from there. Looks like we do have one question. So we have a question from Jim Riggs. Is a pain maybe less experienced workers, right? Okay, that could be a pain, that if you have less experienced workers in a particular industry, it may lead to more mistakes. But then with that pain in mind, what are direct resources, products, or services that WIOA agencies have that may be able to directly respond to that lack of experience or support with that lack of experience? Okay, we have another one, paying to recruit, train, and pay for the recruitment and training process. Good to go. On-the-job training can solve this, exactly. So if an employer wants to develop new business, but because of any array of issues, it is very cost prohibitive, we do have resources such as customized training dollars or on-the-job training dollars that can potentially amortize those costs for employers and make it a little bit easier for them to go on with that business development. So no, Mr. Griffin, you're exactly right. Okay, looks like in-house promotions to help new employees. Again, Mr. Riggs, is very good. So that's those incumbent worker training dollars, those IWT dollars, right? Incumbent worker training dollars, especially if there's, whenever there's a guaranteed promotion at the end, can be a great resource for not just helping to get current employees, incumbent workers promoted, but it actually helps companies in the long run because there's a lot of research around better management training and having really good leadership, having a reverberating positive effect throughout other areas of your business, especially when it comes to retention of your entry-level workers and the efficiency of the work that they do when they have really good sort of like ground level management. So that's great. All right, so another solution is using local workforce partners to locate potential employees, including those both WIOA eligible and helping promote diverse and inclusive workforce solutions. Okay, no, very good. So one pain that I thought we tried to make really obvious that I haven't seen yet, transportation, right? Did anyone notice the commute times? What resources can help with the transportation issues. Yep, Sean is just pointing, yep, just saying that right there. Yep, so again, this is a good exercise to just think about when you have those conversations, really master what are the products, resources, services that you have at your disposal as a WIOA agency that can directly respond to some of these business needs. Okay.
Mike, can I add just one more thing? I think the thing for me about all of this is I think about, in any time in my life when I bought a product or service, and the one that always comes to mind is I had to buy a new roof on a house once. And so I had a pain. Which was that I had a leaky roof and I needed to get it fixed quickly. The person who I ended up buying the roof from really thought about what my needs were and assessed that versus trying to sell me on their product. They said, so what I'm hearing is that you need this quickly, that you need this done, in a budget, and that you need it so that you can go on and live your life and not have to take off days from work because you're having to be at home for this. When they assessed that those were the things that I had that were pain points to me and how they could be a gain maker for me and how they could get this all done, that didn't even feel like there was really a sale involved in that or a transaction. And so the idea with all of this is that I think we all have great products and services that we offer. What I would say as 20 years ago, I think I felt great about some of the things that I was doing and what I had to offer in the companies that I worked for. But I would go in and really push that because I thought, you need to think that this is as great as I do. What I'd say the switch happened was that when I really stopped and said, I need to understand what this business is trying to achieve, what this organization, what their hiring needs are, what are their goals, and I can tie what I do to their goals, the selling part sort of goes away because what you're really doing is meeting a need. That's what this pain and gain activity is really about, is there are some really powerful offerings that you all have because of the services you provide, because of being part of the WIOA system. A lot of times employers don't even know that. Right. What they know is there's certain pains that they have or certain goals that they're now trying to achieve that you are a quick fix to be able to solve those. Being able to lead the horse to water sort of and open their mouth and do that for them can really help them understand we're here to support you.
You're less of a salesperson and more of a teammate.
Yes.
Yep. So yeah, it's exactly what Susan said. You're really listening to support, not necessarily to push your products. But did anyone else have any other ideas? It's been some great activity in the chat. Nathan had a really good idea about carpools. But otherwise, I think we can move on to the next slide. But really good job, everyone. So getting into commercial awareness, we're going to go at what is commercial awareness, what are the different ways to increase your commercial awareness, and then we'll do a demonstration activity looking at the Restore Illinois page on the State of Illinois website, just to look at those reopening phases. So we can go on to the next slide. So what is commercial awareness? Commercial awareness is the ability to understand what makes a business or organization successful. And it is usually through the understanding of trade knowledge or how a business interacts with the market. So buying or selling products or selling services to the market, right? So I may buy and sell cars, or I may have a network of car repair people that go and fix cars for different dealerships. You see the difference between buying and selling that product or commodity versus selling the service of vehicle maintenance to the market. So yeah, we can go on to the next slide. So there are a couple ways to stay commercially aware, and this is another chance for you all to be interactive here. Here's a list of different ways to be commercially aware. If you all have other things that you would like to add to this list, it is not exhaustive by any means. Please add any additions to the chat, but just reading through here, you can follow your employer partners on LinkedIn or other social media platforms. You can join industry-specific organizations or associations. You can attend quarterly earning calls for employers. I don't know if anybody uses any of those, cell phone investment apps, but a lot of times they'll send you notifications where you'll get those earning calls for for the private sector entities. You can receive news alerts and RSS feeds. So if you follow certain news publications, you can set up news alerts where they track the titles of different employer partners for you. You can join and listen to local chambers of commerce, especially if you work with a lot of small businesses, or if you're in if you're in a community that really relies on small businesses. You want to be very aligned with your local chamber of commerce, because they'll be working with a lot of the small businesses and doing a lot of support there. Newsletters from trade organizations, that's kind of redundant to the news alerts. I'll say even recently, I did some research on a partner in the TDL industry, and I found out from that research that the Federal Motor Carrier and Safety Association has new guidelines that will go into effect February 2022. That's going to cause this particular partner to lose a good percentage, almost 25% of their in-house training personnel, right? And they already have issues with bringing on entry-level personnel for this particular role. So that's only going to compound their supply-demand issue going forward for this particular occupational role, right? But having that commercial awareness, to the point Susan made earlier, now when we go into a meeting with that partner, I'm not just going to push, hey, I got this great thing for you and I got that great thing for you, when in the background, they're going through some pretty tough times. They're going to have a huge administrative burden on them over the next year. Let's think about that pain and ways we can be a pain reliever when we start that conversation, as opposed to just pushing out every piece of knowledge that we know, right? I didn't see anything go in the chat, but did anyone from reading this list have any other ideas of ways to stay commercially aware? Partnering with local training providers such as IMEC. So Norm says partnering with local training providers such as IMEC to be aware of projects eligible for funding, keeping contact with HR managers. Very good. Yeah, no, yeah, those are WIOA approved training providers. I'm sure they have great, deep employer relationships. So being in contact with them, figuring out when classes are starting, figuring out if they have interview dates with employers for when classes are over. That's a good way to figure out, hey, if I have a bunch of clients that are interested in vehicle maintenance or a pharmacy technician or whatever industry they're interested in, and then knowing training providers that have, really good employer relationships, that have class cadences based on interview dates, that can be golden. So yeah.
I just think this is such a critical piece that I would tell you many years ago, I just did not do. We and Mike is part of my team, that he is constantly updating us. This weekend, we found out one of our large retail partners that we work with, not essential retail, but retail, we got an alert, and we all were knowing it right away to say, hey, listen, they've just announced a $25 million initiative nationally on focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion. That just gives us that opportunity to know what is going on with that employer, so that when we go into our meeting with them, which we have in 2 weeks, we can be able to do that. If you also know, though, that that's going on and you don't have a meeting with an employer, it's important to share that information with the customers that you're serving, because the more information they know, we know that that stands out when they get to an interview, to know what is going on with that organization. It just really becomes a critical piece, I think, for ultimate success, becoming commercially aware.
Yep. I mean, it shows our work. It shows that we're committed. It shows our expertise. So, it's just a good way to build that rapport and really, like I said, address their needs specifically. So yeah, if there's no other questions or updates on the chat here, we can move on to the next slide. All right, so reopening phases for COVID-19. I am going to share my screen. Give me 1 second.
As Mike's doing that, I think the key that we just thought why this is part of commercial awareness is that knowing what phase, what industry, what businesses are truly open for what kind of things is really critical in your area. And so Mike's got a quick guide. Maybe you already look at this, but I think it could be extremely helpful as you're trying to, again, keep that commercial awareness IQ up.
Yeah, so I mean, as a career coach or as a WIOA case manager, and you're working with customers on a daily basis, and you want to send them to the most relevant opportunity, this can be helpful in understanding where your particular region is as far as our opening guidelines and what businesses would have the most demand based on their ability, based on their operational capacity. So we see, if everyone can see my screen, Susan, you see
Yep,
it?
you're good.
Yep, good to go. So this is the regional phase dashboard. You get a map of the entire state, but if you scroll to the bottom, you'll see region, current phase, and then counties, right? If you find your county, you'll see which phase your county is in. It looks like the entire state has moved to phase 4, which is good. I am in Cook County, Chicago, but I'll stick with Cook County, right? And if you pull this up, it'll tell you we're in phase 4 revitalization, right? As you scroll down, it'll tell you exactly what's opening, right? So what type of gatherings, what the travel restrictions are, what healthcare providers are open, and then what businesses in particular are open, right? So manufacturing, all manufacturing is open with safety guidelines, non-essential businesses, all employees return to work. Now, you may be seeing this information and just saying, okay, this is good, but it's really important to look at it in comparison to what the other phases are. Now, as we are still in revitalization and we continue to hope and pray to continue to move past this pandemic. If we are in a situation where we see another surge and we are reverted back to phase 1, which has happened already during this pandemic. Did my screen move again? Does everyone see phase 1 rapid spread? Good to go. This is what phase 1 rapid spread looks like. So it's different than phase 4, right? Manufacturing, only essential manufacturing only, right? So all those employers that could have been non-essential and open with the right Illinois Department of Public Health guidelines, now they are closed down. Those jobs are no longer available. That demand's no longer there, right? Non-essential businesses, employees of non-essential businesses are required to work from home, except for minimum basic operations, right? So again, phase 4, where you saw those non-essential businesses opened up with certain safety guidelines, here, they're completely closed down and exclusively remote, right? So again, it's important, bars and restaurants open for delivery, pickup, and drive-through only, right? So it's important to remember these opening and closing phases. So that way, when you are coaching your customers through certain opportunities, if a customer says, hey, yeah, I'm a student, but I just want a part-time job, you can still tell them, well, part-time job in hospitality is still not going to happen right now because we're in phase 3 or phase 2. However, manufacturing, especially with warehouse roles and essential retail at grocery stores being up so high, you probably could find a decent warehouse role part-time, 15 to 20 hours a week, right? That would be a good coaching using this information at hand. I don't know if there's anything else in particular. I'm going to stop sharing and just allow any time for questions about that in particular. No questions there.
Questions,
okay.
Comments, hope you all are following that. It obviously affects what we do and how we do things in the world we live in now. Thanks, Mike.
No problem, no problem.
So I think just to close this up, because I know we're getting short on time, like the idea that we just thought as we went through this today is this is that small shift I mentioned at the beginning of the hour of, if you think about these 3 scenarios on the right, we all have a need to place customers into jobs. If you think about applying this value proposition model in a new way, what you would do would be listen to your employer's hiring needs, review their job posting, and submit candidates who address them. What you wouldn't do is have candidates submit to jobs, or you wouldn't submit candidates that are not qualified and only increase the already full job requisitions. More applications that don't meet the qualifications are not going to help out our employer partners. And quite frankly, in some cases, can be a little more frustrating that they feel like they haven't been listened to on what their pains and gains are. In the second scenario, needing to build employer relationships, what can you do? Have commercial awareness and understand the pains and gains that you can address with the employer instead of just trying to pitch or sell the service offerings that you have. You really need to tie it to that employer and see, I have all these services. How is that alleviating? Or how do I know if an employer has a specific initiative they're working on, it can be helpful for me to actually help them achieve that goal. That's that gain creator as well. I think for time's sake, since I know we're at 2, I'm going to go ahead and eliminate that third, but you can think about it yourself of what, if your organization has targeted populations that you need to get jobs, what do you do versus not do with this value proposition model. The idea is we're just trying to change the mindset just a little bit so that everybody thinks about this in a different way to address the pain and think about how you can be a gain creator for your employer partners. And I think we got one more slide to just wrap up, and then I think we're good to go. So the idea on all of this is, I think a couple of things. Applying this value proposition can be really helpful so that you know the pains and gains. Increasing commercial awareness, I say, is a game changer for us, so we really understand and have an idea before we even ask a question to an employer what might be said. Many employers, or there are many ways to become commercially aware. We'll have this document shared so you can look and see. Maybe you have some of your own as well. Understanding those phases, as Mike went through, are important. And then what I would say is you don't need to get crazy to get started. If there's just really one person in your organization who can sort of lead this function to sort of understand how we provide value proposition, become your person who's really on the cusp of being commercially aware. You may even know this. You may have this person now. I think that's where you can start as you start to try to build this environment in the organization. So we started today, Kirsten, let's go to the last one, I think. We started this with 4 agenda items. We want to talk through those 3 categories: operational and hiring, operational not hiring, operational not hiring. So we really understood what employers are facing. We then went into this kind of value proposition theory of what are employer pains and gains and how we can be either the pain reliever or the gain creator. Then increasing your commercial awareness so that you understand, even if you don't get to talk to an employer, what's going on in their world right now. And then finally ending with that commitment and understanding. I think that's where really we can take a leap, all of us, on being able to help navigate this employer relationships, which has changed dramatically in the last 12 months here in Illinois, across the United States, and across the world. That's it for us, unless there are any comments or questions that anybody has. You're welcome, Norm.
No problem.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Susan and Mike and Tennille. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time for these sessions. I feel like they've been very valuable. If you would like to or did not have a chance to watch the other sessions from Skills for Chicagoland's Future, we do have those housed on our website, and I put that previously in the chat. I will put it in there again as well, and you can watch those recordings. We will also, I just wanted to reiterate that this is recorded and it'll be housed on the same website along with the PowerPoint slides. So if you want to follow along with any of the links that they've showed today, those will be in the PowerPoint slides as well. And then also, tomorrow you will receive a follow-up survey about this session specifically. And if you could take 5 minutes out of your workday, we would really appreciate your feedback moving forward for our professional development team. And we look forward to reading that feedback, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation. You're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, skills team. So thank you very much. Thank you all, to all of our attendees, for taking the time out of your afternoon to spend with us. And with that, I'll close this out.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye. Thank you.